So our final event is a panel discussion on, I guess, the central theme of our organization. Personal visions of a gender-equal future and how to get there. The way we'll do it is we have 4 panelists. They'll each have 10 minutes to present their personal vision for a gender-equal future and how to get there. And then we'll open it up to the floor for questions. You can address your questions to the panel as a whole or to an individual. And if different panelists want to respond to the question, I will just make a note. Just give me a hand signal. I'll make a note and we'll go through in turn. And we'll continue until 4:45. So we've got an hour and a half for this. So there's a good piece of time. 5:45. My mistake. Thank you. It's okay. Any questions? All right. So, yeah.
Do you think that a panel and a conference like this would have been viable even 2 years ago?
Well, not in Ottawa because we didn't even exist.
I mean, with this wealth of speakers, the variety of topics, and the fact that the pushback seems to be dying down. Our critics seem to be, the lies that our critics tell about us seem to be having less effect.
I don't know, but that's kind of what our panel is about. I guess we'll end up exploring that question, how we move towards real equality. So we've all met the panelists and heard their bios, except for Deborah Connors on the end. So I'll tell you a little bit about Deborah. Deborah Connors recently completed her PhD in sociology at Carleton University, here in Ottawa. Her dissertation examines the nuancing of feminist understandings of men who have used violence in heterosexual relationships. For this research, she interviewed feminist violence against women workers and activists, partner abuse response workers, and private practitioners. Deborah's been involved in feminist movements for over 20 years and a participant observer in the men's movements for over 10 years. So let's begin.
I think the patriarchal overlord should go first.
You've identified him as the patriarchal overlord. He gets his way.
Oh, dang it. I really don't, I'm not going to fill up my 10 minutes, so somebody else go first.
I'll go first. Yeah. I'll get it over with, and I can relax and actually listen to everybody else. Okay, I just jotted down a few things, and some of them were already, to a certain extent, addressed today. I guess that my primary thought, my vision for a gender equal future would be one, and this was brought up in relation to David Shackleton's talk, where we as a society affirm as much as possible, and I don't know that it is ever entirely possible, but we affirm equality of access as an ideal anyway, but we emphatically reject equality of outcome, and we reject the kinds of arguments that we hear about the necessity of ensuring equality of outcome as somehow a good for society. I think we really need to dismantle that idea, but I think that's a big problem. So I think we need to have a discussion about what it means to affirm that men and women are of equal value in society, but may not perform equally in all areas of endeavor. And to me it seems, and I could be wrong about this, but I have no evidence really, but it seems to me that there is a very deep anger, even an irrational fury in some in some women, I don't even know if it's necessarily in feminists, about women's failure to achieve equally. And I think that part of that comes from our general social emphasis on everything being a social construct. Any time you see somebody not achieving the level of someone else, that's because in some way they've been disadvantaged or held back. We're very, very uncomfortable as a society with the idea that people have different capacities. And I think women believed, many of them, that in the 1960s, with the throwing off of various kinds of restraints and social limitations, that women would, within a short time, begin achieving in those typically male areas like science and technology and engineering and high-level mathematics and all of that. And I think the fact that we haven't is causing all sorts of anger and the determination to find ever more minute but supposedly significant sources of limitation and subjugation. So, but how we can have that kind of conversation and how I think women can do the work, it would have to be some kind of personal work of accepting, maybe not that they personally are limited, but that perhaps their sex overall is not going to make the achievements that we keep hearing constantly women are primed to make in STEM and would be making if it weren't for the intolerable, though often invisible and impossible to detect, sexism that destroys their initiative, destroys their ability to do the work, and holds them back. So that's one thing that seems to me a problem that fuels a lot of the irrational accusations and the ever more unjust measures that have to be taken to try to redress this imaginary injustice. In my gender equal world, I would like to see the defunding of major feminist organizations that do not show a genuine commitment to equality between the sexes, that instead work for female privilege. I would like to see the radical feminism of the Andrea Dworkin variety ultimately regarded as really no different in kind from the worst kind of fascist ideology in terms of its hateful supremacism. I'd like to see, maybe most importantly of all, male achievement in building culture and generously sharing it with women recognized. I'd like to see male inventions, male labor, and male sacrifice, especially in war, duly celebrated, affirmed, and mourned. And I would also like to see, as a step in the direction, and I'm not going to hold my breath for this, I would like to see a climate in which feminist organizations and feminist leaders would be forced to apologize for their slanderous misrepresentations of the male sex and their role in enacting discriminatory policies that have ruined lives. That's it.
Oh, sorry, you can go
Deborah,
ahead if
you
you
want to
like.
go?
Okay, sure. Okay, well, might have been easier for me to do this at the beginning of the day than at the end, I'm not sure. So, I'm, closer. Can I move over here so you can see? I'm pretty much going to stick to my script and Let's see how it goes. So I'm a feminist, and I believe that feminism should include the well-being of men. And that is my vision for gender equality that I wish to present today. That my movements include the well-being of men and transgender people, including people of color, indigenous people, disabled people, queer people. In other words, that feminists be for everyone. And today I've heard a number of claims that feminism doesn't do that. Note that I knew that before I went through the conference, that would be the case. I hear those claims as based in real experiences. Feminisms have not always in all places been for everyone, often far from it. However, the evidence produced by my PhD research project, which I completed in April of this year, suggests that there is actually change happening over time. So I'd like to give you some of this evidence. My PhD was a feminist sociology research project that looked at feminist attitudes toward men who have used violence in their heterosexual relationships. I found several shifts in feminist approaches over time. In the late 1960s, the early 70s, when this work began, the women who I interviewed who started shelters, they had a belief that they could end domestic violence in 5 or 10 years. They were totally convinced that all they would really have to do is tell people what was happening and they would stop. And when that didn't happen, 10 years later of seeing women come into shelters beaten up day after day and those injuries escalating, they began to believe that the men who were abusing women didn't want to change, wouldn't change, or couldn't change. The 1990s saw the beginning of a shift to seeing the ways that men are victimized, and a belief that men must heal too if we are to end domestic violence. A young woman who I interviewed told me that when she began working in services for abused women 5 years earlier, she would not have thought about working to help men heal too. But now she thinks that would be an essential part of ending domestic violence. There's other evidence as well. Bell Hooks is quite a big name in feminism. She's a black woman who has been an academic writing for probably 30 years. In the year 2000, she wrote a book called Feminism is for Everybody. In 2004, she published a book called The Will to Change. And in this book, she says that if we want to create loving men, we need to love men. And she identifies a key piece being to identify the violence of mothers toward their sons. Number 2, there are feminist efforts to create shelters for men. In Ontario, there is a shelter for men in Northern Ontario in an Aboriginal community. And I believe that the women's shelter was actually integral to that shelter being created. There's also an ongoing effort in the last couple of years to create men's shelter in Ottawa. And that's a pro-feminist effort. Pro-feminist work to engage men as allies against violence against women actively includes responding to the victimization that has been experienced in the past by the men who come forward to be volunteers. Number 4, the response to my dissertation within feminist circles, which has included consternation, but also acceptance and welcome, which I wasn't sure if I would get when I started. Number 5, young women I talk with, young feminist women, are particularly emphatic that we need to address men's issues. I hear this regularly. It's not just not just a outlier. And number 6, I gave a talk at a conference, at the American Law and Society Conference in New Orleans this past June. and that was about the need for the women's movement to be open to men's movements. And I had a very positive response from a number of feminist academics who were in the room. Two professors asked if I had written this as an article yet, and they offered to help me write an article, to draft it, and that's really an extraordinary offer. It's not made lightly to help somebody write an article for publishing. So I've given you, a number of pieces of evidence that there's a shift happening within feminisms, and that the critique that we've heard today is actually focusing on only one aspect of what's going on in feminisms. And so I want to issue a challenge to CAFE members as part of my vision. When you hear yourself or someone else saying, feminists don't take men into account, or feminists never, or feminists always, I hope you will remember that feminism is actually feminisms, plural. Just the way that the men's movement is men's movements, plural. Feminisms include a great range of often conflicting beliefs and values under the umbrella of achieving gender equality. And I want to include a little bit of wisdom from the identity, conflict, and reconciliation literature, which I studied in my master's. Groups tend to get into conflict, and men's movements are in conflict with women's movements. Certainly today you heard that. And we tend to get into conflicts with those with whom we have the greatest overlapping interests. So if two groups are like way over here in what they're talking about, they don't tend to interact much, and they don't really care what the other's saying. But it's when two groups have overlapping interests, such as gender equality, that you tend to have the most conflict. And what can happen is that this group over here can focus on this part of what this other group is about, and this group can focus on this part, right? I don't know whether all of you can see me, but I'm saying that we have an overlapping interest, and groups can inadvertently focus on what's the most different in how they address their needs and their interests. And what that often does is help a group clarify who it is for and what it's about. But it often can actually make the characteristics of those groups more entrenched and make change more difficult. So if there's a voice saying over and over, feminists don't care about men, this actually reinforces and empowers that aspect of feminisms. Those who think that way, whether they're inside this movement or that one, or outside of both, can feel recognized and heard and say, yes, this is what feminism is about. I recognize this. We know that. We know that to be true. We have evidence. And this approach, as I said, can make change more difficult. CAFE says that it takes an evidence-based approach, not an ideological one. I've spoken with Justin about how, and David, I think, and possibly Janice. Can I have 2 minutes?
You can dip into more time.
Okay. I've spoken with Justin about how, as a sociologist, I don't believe it's possible for a group to develop an agreed-upon approach to an issue without having an ideology. In fact, I would define ideology as group agreement about what the important issues are. So I see CAFE as having an ideology, a very strong one in fact, and even though I don't believe a group can be evidence-based in its approach, I do believe it's important to confront ideology with evidence. The belief that feminism does not care about men and that it will not change in my lifetime is an ideological statement. It's a belief. And as I have demonstrated today, or at least provided some evidence for, it's necessarily a partial expression of what feminism is. So I've presented you with evidence of change within feminist ideology that is occurring right now. And it's my hope that you could use this evidence to understand more of your own ideological blind spots and to create a more nuanced response to feminisms, plural. The feminist movement can be more for everybody, and you have the opportunity to empower ongoing changes within feminisms that increase the overlap between feminisms and men's issues movement, or to reinforce the aspects of feminism that you see as problematic. In closing, I would like to thank you for your trust in including a feminist in the program today. And, oh, now I'm going to have a feeling. I enjoy being part of this community, and I hope to continue to learn from and with you all in the future. Thank you. You. Okay, I didn't prepare anything. I'm just going to have to wing it.
So thanks to all three of you for joining me on the panel, and appreciate Deborah's perspectives. And I know it takes courage to be on a panel where you might feel like you're outnumbered. I don't think that's true, because I think we all have different nuances on this question, but I've been on panels where I've had that feeling of potential discomfort. I did a panel on sexual harassment, and it was me and a young woman from the campus LGBTQ group, and a woman from the campus feminist group. And let's just say I was the odd man out in more ways than one. So I get that, and I applaud your courage. What I've been doing, actually, I hadn't prepared anything until today. I was listening as intently as possible to other speakers and trying to reflect on what I had heard and making some notes, which means that while my comments should be fresh, they are also going to be a little scattered. So I apologize for that. I'll say a few observations, I guess, a few thoughts and lessons, but I'm eager to hear what others think about those remarks, and I know we're going to get into a discussion. So one thing that I talked about a lot in my earlier presentation is about treating people as individuals, and that's very important to me. I don't think we win anything by setting up a competition over which gender has it worse, or which group in our society has it worse, and slicing and dicing society into all these different groups and segments, and then competing for scarce resources of attention or investment or interest. I think we treat people as the complicated, unique individuals that each of us are. So that's one vision that I see as an outcome of what a successful gender equal future would look like. People truly are treated as complicated individuals. Another thing, and this I borrow from David, who wrote very eloquently about this in his most recent book, and that is to do with the different ways that we tend to treat men and women, and that is that women tend to be given compassion and sympathy, but not always respect, and men the reverse. So that's a kind of a generalization, but I think that was one of the outcomes of your research into gender equality, David. So obviously I'd like to see a future where we understand those blind spots and we're ready to confront them. And what that means is that there are definitely legitimate issues for both men and women, but they're going to tend to be different issues. For women, it's going to be getting into professional domains where men might tend to have the edge. For men, it might be getting equal treatment to women when it comes to issues of abuse and trauma and other mental health concerns. I emphasized earlier some of the key values for CAFE, which I share very strongly. One is collaboration. This isn't a zero-sum game. We can actually make gains by working in partnership with other organizations. People often think, well, if you're building services for men, where are the resources going to come from? Doesn't that mean that women will suffer? Well, I don't see it that way. I think actually if women's groups and men's groups and other groups that care about health or having access to justice or whatever it is come together, we can actually make a stronger case for increasing the pie as opposed to just dividing it up into ever smaller pieces. Common ground. Finding a way to work together with folks folks who might come at this from different backgrounds and different perspectives. And one way I think you can do that is you can reframe issues so that there's an appreciation that a lot of issues which might at first blush seem like women's issues or perhaps as men's issues actually in a way affect all of us. You know, one example might be professions. Some professions tend to be dominated by women, like maybe the healthcare professions, the social service professions, others, let's say the STEM professions, which we were talking about earlier, the engineering, science, and math professions, more perhaps dominated by men. But I see our goal of getting women into traditionally male professions and the goal of getting men traditionally female professions is actually the same basic project, because what we're trying to do is give more options to everybody, so that families who are trying to raise children but then also have enough money to pay their bills can figure out any way of negotiating that and know that it's perfectly acceptable for perhaps the woman to take the higher paying job, perhaps the man to stay at home and raise the kids, and there shouldn't be any barriers to men and women acting out whatever kinds of life opportunities they think would make sense for them and for their family. Talked earlier about positivity, I can't stress that enough, and part of that is inclusion. And for me, I'm really big on empowering anybody who has an interest in these issues. And I know that in the larger men's movement, there's really a debate happening about, you know, whether women should be part of the men's rights movement or the men's issues movement. I think it's essential that everybody is part of this. And I can tell you some of the strongest activists for our cause are women. I mean, I'm sitting beside a few of them right here. But in addition to that, if I consider the clients that we get at our men's center in Toronto, some of the most passionate advocates are female loved ones on behalf of men in their life. So we have had mothers and grandmothers and sisters and daughters and female friends reach out to us, sometimes before the man who really needs the counseling or the legal services or whatever it is finally enters our center. First it will be this loving woman reach out to us. And that's because a lot of these issues are family issues, you know, parental alienation, anxiety and depression. I mean, if a man is going through these problems, they're obviously going to affect both the men and the women in his life. So I think it's essential that we do take that inclusive approach. And my vision for a gender equal future would be one where men and women are working together on behalf of their loved ones. I shy away from labels. I maybe, you know, that somebody's gonna pick a fight with me about that, but I don't think there's all that much to gain from adopting any label, whether it's feminism or men's rights activism. One of the reasons, as Deborah mentioned, is that there's so many different ways of understanding the feminisms or the men's rights movement. There's so many different variations on that. And the other problem that I have is that very often using those labels actually ends up being a conversation stopper. And I'd rather start conversations, not stop them in their tracks. And what often happens, and I've experienced this myself, is that if somebody comes to the opinion that I am a men's rights activist, let's say, then I either become their best friend if they also are a men's rights activist, or I'm their worst enemy if they're, let's say, a feminist or another ideology. So I just find more often than not these labels actually get in the way, that they're distracting, they're polarizing. I don't see them serving much of a purpose in terms of making tangible, concrete gain. Two other things. One, just to dovetail off of that health and wellness focus, it's telling stories. You know, I told a few stories in the beginning of my remarks. We just had a really powerful session in the other room where we went around in a circle and folks talked about their own experiences or the experiences of the men in their life, and it was extremely powerful. And it's therapeutic, I think, to tell their stories, but it also raises awareness and tells other men, you're not alone, and there's hope for you. So I think telling stories is great for the individual who's conveying that information, but I think it has a really profound effect on moving this conversation forward and finding that kind of common ground and that sense of compassion for all of us as individuals. The last thing I'm going to mention is, because we were talking a little bit about ideology, or Deborah in particular brought it up. If any of you have read Paul Nathanson and Catherine Young's books on misinjury, I think we've maybe got a couple of those here. the McGill academics. Anybody read those books? Spreading Misandry, Legalizing Misandry, Transcending Misandry, and they're coming up with a book called Managing Misandry, I think, in the next year or so. So they talk a lot about ideology with respect to feminism versus men's rights activism. And I think, and this will be my last point, that we should get away from ideology. And perhaps that's impossible, and that's an interesting debate that I'd like to have. But as much as possible, we need to find those blind spots. As individuals, we might have ideologies, but I think as an organization, it's really important that we find a way to get past them. So Nathanson and Young talk about 4 or 5 aspects of ideology: essentialism, dualism, which is seeing your group as good and the other group as external, and the other, which is something Karen talked about, and being the enemy. Selective cynicism, which means that when the other group engages in bullying and censorship and hate, that's the worst thing in the world. When your own group does it, you kind of look the other way and come up with all sorts of excuses for it. If we have to be careful we're not doing that, and we have to call it out when we see other groups doing it. There's no way to get to a gender equal future if we're all in our silos with our different ideologies and butting heads and not finding any common ground. This is just kind of a cute way to end, but you were talking about neoteny, is that how you pronounce it? I actually think we can use that to our advantage. And Denise, if you can hold up that banner that I asked you to get. This is a billboard ad. We put up a few of these in Toronto relating to parental alienation. And how cute is that little girl there?
Oh yeah, no, she probably brought in some donations.
She did, and raised awareness about alienation.
Yeah.
But alienation is a good issue. Is a good example of an issue that really doesn't only affect men, but grandparents and cousins and aunts and uncles. So we can be very clever in terms of how we message as well, and we can take advantage of some of those lessons from biology. So, but anyways, thank you for your attention.
Left me with like 45 seconds.
I don't even need to write
I think that did work.
Okay, so I'm going to depart quite a bit from what everybody, because this is what is my vision for a gender equal future. I don't have one, and there's a few reasons for that. Number one, I think that there are ways that we can treat human beings equally across racial lines, across tribal lines, across even cultural lines, religious lines, all of those things, right? I think that those things are possible, but the differences between men and women that in aggregate are too fundamental and some of the things that I said in my talk, our responses to those differences are too fundamental and too ingrained in us for us to ever be able to really treat men and women equally. We can narrow the sentencing gap. It's not going to go away. We can provide services for men in crisis, but we're always going to want to shift back towards giving women more when they need it. And so essentially what I'm looking at is I'm trying to take a practical approach as far as what's possible and what's not. I'm trying to take a practical approach as far as not wanting to have a vision in the first place. People always ask me, what do you want? How do you want things to work? What do you want it to look like? What's your perfect society? And I just say, that's none of my business, or yours, or anyone else's. I don't do that, and I won't do that. I won't decide on an outcome that I want. I won't decide on a perfect society where I think everything will be perfect. Number one, it's never going to happen in any situation. Economic systems, there's no economic system that's perfect. There's no one system politically that's perfect, that's going to work for everybody. And so essentially, no matter how you do gender equality, whether you focus on equality of opportunity or equality of outcome, you're still not going to be able to get it perfect. And in order to do that, you're going to have to get into injustices and coercive measures in order to enforce it on people. So I'm much more concerned with general fairness and with a general sense of justice in terms of treating individuals with human value and human dignity. That's what I want. I also essentially would like there to be some acknowledgement that difference exists, and that means that male victims of domestic violence may not be best served by having an equal number of beds in shelters, even if there's an equal number of victims. They might actually do better having some other type of service provided to them. Things like the men's sheds, where they're in there doing their manly things, and sharing their experiences and allowing themselves to trust enough to become vulnerable around other men and make friendships and create bonds and feel like they're doing something useful, right? Well, you know, men require a certain amount of, a certain difference in what they're going to respond to. And that's not necessarily a product of acculturation. That's not necessarily a product of how they've been socialized since they were children. That's maybe just the way men are, is that the majority of men respond differently to different things. And when it comes to psychology, there's one fundamental difference between men and women. Tom Golden has talked about it before. When two women, a psychologist and a woman they sit face to face, and they make eye contact, and it signals intimacy, and it signals trust, and the patient will feel safe to say what they feel. But when you have two men face to face making eye contact, that's more likely to signal a challenge. It's more likely to lock a man down, just as an instinctive response. And so essentially what we need to do is we need to actually tailor our approaches. There are a percentage of men who are going to not fit this mold. There are a percentage of women who do not, believe me, who do not fit the typical female mold. But we are going to have to actually allow for these differences and maybe come up with some unique ways in areas where men don't really respond positively to the way we deal with women's problems. Unique ways to help them do that and maintain their dignity as men. So I think essentially respecting difference, respecting individuality, you know, giving everybody as much freedom as possible to live their lives as long as they're not messing with anybody else. And but equality, to me it's almost a scary word. So you know, I guess that's all I have to say. I have no vision.
So let's move into questions from all of you to the panel.
You have your first, Janice.
Yes, I do.
I'd like to thank Karen Straughn for saying that she doesn't want a gender equal future. I've heard this before. I'm old enough. I remember the proletarian revolution and all the Marxist crap that went with it. If you want democracy, if you want a thriving economy, you need capitalism. And yes, Bill Gates and Steve Jobs will become multi-billionaires. That's part of the cost, but we get cheap iPhones in return. If you want a society that advances, men and women must be free to pursue their own directions. And these directions will be based on ability and on interest, not on some idea of equality. Now, as for the lady who just got her PhD, you've got a great future ahead of you. But here's what's not talked about in domestic violence. Do they mention women abusing men? Certainly not. The evidence comes from the 1980s that women were more likely to strike first with an object and without provocation because they knew they would get away with it. The same, by the way, is true even of Mormon and of Quaker women. They know they can get away with it. And when the law is on your side, it leads to excesses. And here's another thing that's never mentioned in domestic violence: violence against children. The most dangerous age for homicide is 0 to 3 years old. And most of those homicides are perpetrated by mothers, by neglect, by abuse, by starvation, and by outright murder. Except it doesn't appear in the general data because it's called infanticide. The women are supposed to go slightly crazy after they give birth to a baby, but not men, of course. If a man kills his own son, he's a monster. As for equality, we're not going to get it, nor should we want it. The whole function of this talk about domestic violence and about rape is to terrorize women and demonize men. Women in the West are living the best quality of life women have had in all history, and with the least amount of violence. 70% of homicide victims are men. 97% of all deaths on the job are men. 86% of all those who are victims of assault and battery are men.
Jeffrey, can you get to a question?
I sure will. And I would like to add two more things. Bell Hooks is a bigot. It doesn't matter if she's black, that doesn't make her any better. And as for Dworkin, she's a psychopath. The world is better off without her. As for the question, do you really want an equal world? Do you really want it enforced by the state? Do you really want it enforced by agencies? Remember Ronald Reagan's warning, I'm here from the government and I'm here to help you. Go away.
Anybody want to speak to that?
I wouldn't even know where to begin. That was pretty epic. Other than, you know, I do want to say something just in terms of because there has been, and it really does have to be difficult. I imagine there are some feminists, some self-described feminists who I have a great deal of admiration for. And when we recently lost Karen DeCrow, you must have no. She was national president of the National Organization for Women, I believe in 1972. She's a lawyer. And in 1981, she successfully argued a case in front of a district court that a man who was tricked into fathering a child by a woman lying about birth control should not be held financially responsible for that child. She was successful in arguing in a courtroom in 1981 for the legal surrender of paternity rights and responsibilities. And the decision was overturned on appeal, right? So, and now we have insanity like 15-year-old statutory rape victims being forced to pay their rapist's child support, but also being forced to pay to apply in court for custody, for parental access rights. So yeah, this is what we have now. There have been some very, very stand-up feminists out there. There absolutely have. There still are even now. But and yes, things are changing, I think, because feminisms, all the different feminisms have begun to see the way the wind is blowing. And they're beginning to see maybe that they can't ignore certain things anymore. Or maybe they've had enough men's rights activists wave, you know, the work of Murray Strauss in their face and say, well, what about this? And they actually maybe have stopped to look at it. So, but yeah, I do think that we need to acknowledge that there are a few good apples in the barrel, and none of us are 100% you know, worm free. So I know that.
The point that was made that there's some sort of dichotomy or tension between the fight for equality and freedom. And I'm not sure I really agree with that. I think it depends on your interpretation of both freedom and equality. We mentioned that equality can take one of different forms, in particular equality of opportunity versus equality of outcome. If what you have in mind is leveling the playing field for purposes of creating equality of opportunity, I throw this back out at the audience, is that in any way in tension or in opposition to freedom? I'm not sure. I think there are other forms of equality that perhaps the gentleman was really referring to, which are at odds with freedom, but I don't think they have to be in tension with each other. I think they can reinforce each other. So, but I'm interested in what other people think about that.
I would just like to say that I mean, this is something that I have thought about a lot too, the whole equality issue and whether it's compatible with freedom. And when you have individuals who are not equal in terms of their abilities and their work ethic and their drive and their ambition and their dedication and all of that. I mean, we've now had in this country, I think since 1984, various kinds of equity hiring or affirmative action measures in various kinds of crown corporations, government offices, certainly at universities all across the country. I participated in all sorts of hiring sessions, especially at the University of Saskatchewan. Well, we hired 5 people while I was there. One of them hotly contested, and that was the only time we hired a man, and that was against the wishes of the feminist activists in the department. And I'd be very interested to know whether there are any feminists who have objected to affirmative action hiring measures on the grounds that they are outrageously, I find them obscenely discriminatory. I was ashamed. Probably that was the thing that most turned me off, in addition to the experience of watching young men in classes having to hear feminist propaganda over and over again, but looking at the CVs of these young men who were applying for jobs in all good faith, believing that they were being looked at on their merits, and knowing that the vast majority of people in the department making decisions about their lives, they were the least bit interested in their merits. They were interested in hiring women, either because they felt they had to show their rectitude because they were guilty men, or because they were feminist activists fueled by a sense of righteous outrage. And obviously that didn't just go on in my department, it was going on in departments everywhere, and has been going on for 3 decades. And I just don't understand how anybody can claim that, oh, there's all this great stuff in feminism and feminists believe in equality, and we still have all these protocols on the books. Just a few months ago, the University of Melbourne in Australia had 3 positions that were for women only. At least they're honest about it. I mean, there have been women-only positions being hired for the last 3 decades, but they weren't so honest about the fact that men need not have applied, so at least men know they don't have to in this case. But I find that outrageous, and I don't know how anyone who claims to care about men too can justify that, except by fantasies of male oppression that surely have not existed ever, or certainly not for the last 50 years. So, I don't know, what was my point of that? I am much more interested in freedom. I want talented women or people from whatever group to have the opportunity to flourish and to contribute to their society, but I'm ashamed and appalled and disgusted to be part of a society that discriminates in that way.
I did want to add one quick thing. Janice triggered a brief flashback of something that Justin had said, that maybe evening the playing field in order to bring about equality of opportunity, right? Maybe that is not incompatible with freedom. Well, I guess, you know, by evening the playing field, you mean opening the doors to everybody, right? So that everybody can walk through, and I can, you know, and yeah, we can put in a wheelchair ramp. That's cool too. But if it means that we want all children to start off with the exact same start, which essentially means that, I mean, I've read some social justice article that it was essentially trying to say that children whose parents read to them at bedtime are privileged and they are, you know, in comparison to children whose parents don't. And that something must be done to even this playing field. And, well, okay, so does that mean that my sister who lives here in Ottawa and makes a ever-loving fuck ton of money, okay, does she have to, like, just distribute that equally amongst, you know, like, is she allowed to buy her kids clothes at, you know, American Eagle when there are people like me forced to shop at Walmart? Right? Really? Her kids own motorbikes. My kids don't own motorbikes. This is my kids do not have equality of opportunity. My kids will not be able to have these massive education funds that I was not able to start for them when I was a waitress. They're going to have to pay for their own university, and her kids haven't had to pay a dime of their own money for that, right? So they don't have equal opportunities, right? And I'm okay with that, right? Because the doors are open, and if they can manage to walk through them, you know, on their own steam, or with a little help from their parents or their grandparents or whatever, I don't think that that's necessarily an unfair or an unjust thing. So we really have to, even when we look at equalizing the playing field for equality of opportunity, we kind of have to, you know.
I think it would also be unobjectionable, let's say, the Healthy Start program, where they provide breakfast for young students, some of whom are in families that can't afford breakfast. And the students who aren't able to eat breakfast at home can take advantage of that, and those who were privileged, if you want to use that word, to be able to eat breakfast, they don't have to worry about it. That could be an example of a program I think we'd all be okay with, which might go some ways to deepening that playing field. So it's complicated.
Yeah, it is. We just have to do it in a sane way, and we have to really be mindful. Sorry, I should have said that into the link.
So I'm noticing that we have a remarkable panel that can talk for 15 minutes, but
And not agree on
doesn't get a question. What is going to happen when we actually get a question? So I am going to ask if we can be a little briefer, because I'm seeing the line of questioners is long. That's it.
Lies, slander, greed, selfishness, bigotry are generally the result of weaknesses in their parenting skills by their parents. So I thought, is there any effort to improve parents' parenting skills? And if we do achieve a society where respect, dignity, compassion, truth, duty, trust, gratitude, and patience are prevalent, then how do we identify that point by which we can balance these various manifested effulgent virtues? So you might see those as two questions, but I see it as, is there a movement to improve parenting skills? And is there any effort to identify some God?
Okay, well, I can speak to this a little bit. There is some evidence that one of the biggest predictors of the development of compassion in children is the daily involvement of their fathers, an involved father. And also free play in nature, unsupervised by adults with other kids. And the reason why this seems to develop compassion is because it's sort of counterintuitive to what you would think. You would think that if you're really compassionate with your child and you provide your child with everything that they need, and you jiggle them every time they cry, and you lavish affection and warmth and lovingness all over them, right? They don't learn they don't model your compassion that you feel for them. They just learn that they're the center of the universe, because children start out as sociopaths. They do. They will sit there and watch their own sibling bleeding all over the place, screaming, and just, yeah, that's all right, man. It looks like it's coming out pretty good there, right? They don't even start to develop compassion until they're in around between 4 and 6 years of age. Any real, what we would recognize it. Until then, they're just little dictators. And so, and they don't give a shit about how much mom needs to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and it's now the 4th time that you've woken her up, right? They don't care. So they're little black holes of need. But essentially, what we need to do, I think, because I think we've taken the entirely wrong tack with that, and this is actually the reason why fathers and free play in nature is really important for kids to develop this, is because fathers are the parent that is generally going to be the one to set fewer boundaries but be more likely to put his foot down and enforce them and say, no, you're going to wait your turn, and no, you're not the most important person in the room, and yes, I know you're miserable, you don't have a right to make everybody else miserable, go away, right? And be just very calm about it, but enforce the boundaries. And free play in nature with other kids, unsupervised, requires them to actually negotiate relationships with other kids, and they learn that if they're a total dickbag, right, the other kids aren't going to play with them, and there's no adult there to smooth things over or mediate the conflict. They have to learn how to deal with it themselves. And so they actually end up developing more of a sense of, or an attention on what the other kids are feeling, because they won't have some adult swoop in and make it all better and, you know, get Bobby and Jimmy getting along again. No, nobody's going to fix it for them, so they actually have to pay attention to how the other kids are feeling and then stop their own behavior and learn to be self-moderating. So I think those are the things, and we've gone the entire opposite direction over the last 2 generations in terms of helicopter parenting and, you know, really being permissive with our kids and giving them everything they need and more and all of that. So I think essentially we've gone in the wrong direction, and we need to go back to, you know, the days of The Sandlot, the movie The Sandlot, and Stand By Me, and all of those things. We're free-range kids. You can Google it. There's actually a website. So.
Thank you.
I'd just like to say I was in agreement with both Justin and Deborah in the sense that we cannot generalize when we're talking about our opposition. It's much better to focus on a specific person or a group and their specific aggressions or oppositions to us. My question to Deborah, is that Deborah's your name, right? Is there any other, like you said, there's examples of feminism working towards you know, making things equal. However, in 2004, 2005, as a father's rights activist, I got a tremendous amount of opposition from feminist groups when I was just trying to break down what I thought was a gender barrier. I thought I was a feminist, and I got called a masculinist, which is the French word for men's rights act, an anti-feminist. And I tried to explain to the media, you know, like that I'm not an anti-feminist, and they just didn't want to listen to me. So my question to you, I'll have just a few questions, individual each one, but Deborah, like, is there any other examples of feminist movements actually working towards more equal? Because all I saw was opposition. Janice, you were talking about, yeah, defunding. Defunding groups that say no, like defunding feminist groups that are not talking about equality, that are actually talking about just about them and not about equality, that don't include men in any of their dialogue. I was wondering if we could take that a step further, and what does the panel think about actually holding governmental offices and people that have mandates like that, whether it be the legal departments, the health departments, the bar association, that actually we take legal actions against them to sue them, you know, in order to say that you're not sticking to your mandate, that you're not keeping our society equal, and that we as a group could actually legally send letters to them, and as individuals, sue them as individuals on large-scale litigation type of thing. I was going to ask Karen, like you were talking about you can't see equality happening or something like that. I'm just wondering if you believe that it's within our society to maintain this this war between the genders as a new war. It's not a war in the Middle East, it's not a drug war, but to keep the working class at each other's throats in order to maintain this sort of distraction from what the government is actually doing, that this war amongst the peasantry, what I call the working class people, is actually essential, and that we cannot get rid of this war, or if we do, we're going to have to replace it with another one. Okay.
What, nothing for me?
No,
Okay, you guys first.
Okay, so I think this goes back to something that I said about opposition, that the groups tend to see, groups in conflict tend to see the other in a dichotomized way. So that was your experience, and I'm sorry you had that experience. And similarly to what Janice said this morning, I can get away with saying more because I'm a woman, right? So when I'm in feminist circles, I often issue the same kind of challenge of, you know, what about men, and what about, you know, what about this? And I'm not seen as anti-feminist, right, for doing that. I'm moving the bar, and those questions are received well. And we do have this thing called institutionalization, and where organizations are is always 20 years behind where the leading edge is, right? Whether we're talking about government, whether we're talking about what's taught in high school, but it's always 20 years behind what's going on in people's minds as they question the status quo. So, and this is where I think you need to be careful, because what you create right now is going to haunt you. It will haunt you for the next 40 years, right? It will haunt you for the next 60 years. So, have I answered your question?
No, well, what do you mean, what would haunt us? Just explain.
The beliefs you set up right now. You know, I've heard somebody say, okay, so cafe is for gender equality, but right now we're working on men's programs because there aren't any.
Yeah.
And then I've heard people say, this will never change in my lifetime. That becomes something where you just focus on men's programs because nobody else is, because nobody else will, and you stop noticing that other people are starting to do so, or are willing to do so. I think there's been a big change from 2005 to now, and it will continue to change, and I personally would like to see more of the overlapping interests for men and women, and that it can be worked on together, or that we can at least work in tandem with each other. And Justin said that we increase the pie rather than worry about we're going to make it smaller, you know?
Just briefly, yeah, I don't think we'll be, I'm always a voice of negativity, I don't think we would be successful in suing any government body or because of ameliorative actions being taken to redress the historical disadvantage. That's why affirmative action hiring is perfectly legal. and is in fact mandated by the government because it's seen as an ameliorative action and is therefore perfectly correct under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. It's still an outrageous injustice, but it's absolutely legal. So I guess all I would say is that I personally don't want a future in which feminism expands to include some men's issues. I want a future without feminism. And because I can't imagine what feminism will do. Well, I can imagine all too well what feminism will do with men's issues. There are all sorts of feminist sites and feminist organizations right now dealing with men's issues, but not in a way that is positive. There's a website that my colleague Steve Brule found on the internet, which is dedicated to combating what's called mascupathy, which is literally the disease of being male. And this is a, for real, very nice website with Christian pastors and psychologists and psychoanalysts and health professionals and educators, with lots of articles, feminist articles, about how men can, become less masculine. And supposedly that's going to make the world a better place, and it's going to be way better for men too, because they'll be more like women, and we know that women are better than men. And I mean, I don't see where can one go with that in a positive direction. Just like I don't see that feminist organizations in the academy, which is control central for feminist control of our society, if things have changed, as you say, Deborah, and by the way, I don't mean any malice towards you, I think you're a wonderful person. I would like to work with you on things, but if although I think we disagree fundamentally, if things have changed, I think they've changed for the worse. I mean, this, as someone said, this hysteria about sexual misconduct and how now even you can pat a person. Patting is considered a form of sexual harassment. Looking at a woman for too long is considered a form of sexual harassment. Jokes, hugging, unwanted kissing, all of these are considered forms of either sexual harassment or sexual assault, depending on, I guess, how the woman decides to complain. This is a descent into pure madness. How is there a concern for maleness being manifested in all of these new policies that are just in the last couple of years being implemented? And you talked, Deborah, about how for years women's concerns about sexual assault weren't addressed, but they shouldn't be addressed at a university. They're adults at university. A university exists to teach the culture, to teach knowledge. They don't exist to protect women or make declarations against the objectification of women or misogyny. They don't exist to placate or to make women feel better about bad experiences they've had. How could that possibly ever happen? And how could people who have no legal training ever decide whether what a female student says happened to her and a male student says didn't happen? How could they ever know whether it happened or not? They're supposed to take measures to respect the victim and expel the student or get him out of a class because the female student claims that it makes it uncomfortable. To me, this seems a massive derailing of not only the purpose of the university, but of the purpose of any kind of fair adjudication of individual rights. So I see things as getting actually much worse.
First off, I just want to ask you, who do I look like? Alex Jones Do you really, like, why does everybody ask me, could this whole gender war be a conspiracy from the top down, or is it the tool of the autocrats, or what?
No,
Okay,
or
number
just
one.
stealing from the bottom up, it doesn't have to be top down.
Number one. Okay, these are two primal of value judgments that we are making when it comes to all of this is like a huge warm blanket, and I think actually, I don't think government is necessarily doing this consciously and like for some kind of gain, unless the gain is to get into debt. Because there was a report that came out of New Zealand in 2014, I think. And what they did was they were measuring people's impact, the impact of New Zealanders on the tax system, right? So they would say, okay, well, when they're 0 years old, they start out, you know, with the services that they got in the delivery and the hospital, and then, okay, we're going to tally it all up, and they tracked it over time. So, you know, like, so it goes up and up and up and up and up and up, or wait, down and down and down and down and down, right? Pulling money out. Okay, and then it starts to go up around age 24, this is for an individual, and then age 40, they're finally in the black. They have finally now hit an even balance on their, I guess you could call it an overdraft, because they started off with all this investment from government through their childhood. And then it goes up to, for men, this is for men, right? Age 40, breaking even. Age 65, peak contribution of about $56,000 into the tax system. That's over their entire working life. And then by age 80, they're down to zero contribution, okay? Women, on average, don't get any closer to breaking even than negative $50,000. Over 80 years, the average woman costs the New Zealand government $120,000 of taxpayer money. Okay? So men who live to 80 contribute nothing into the tax system, and women who live to 80 pull $120,000 out over their lifetimes. Right? This is not profitable for government, this endeavor, right? It's just not. Right? It maybe gives them power for as long as they can, I don't know, convince everybody that fiat currency is actually valid and just print off more money.
So are you
right?
saying that the whole of the economy is based on men who kick off at 65?
Pretty much. And it doesn't even make up for the cost of women. For every man-woman pair, we're still in the red. At least in New Zealand. I'd love to see somebody crunch the numbers here. So essentially what we're dealing with is something that's costing, when you actually put taxpayer money into sort of pushing for these quotas and pushing for things like that, and you wind up reducing men's earning power. If men are the only ones who are contributing to the actual tax base, then their earning power needs to be maximized so we can tax them. I mean, you can't just neglect their economic productivity and just, oh, we'll just shave a little bit more off of the less and less money that's coming in for them, because men's wages have stagnated or fallen since the 70s. So women's wages have gone up, but I guess not up enough. So essentially, and a lot of that has to do with them taking, you know, it's not profitable for the government to finance all this.
I was talking about keeping us at odds with each other.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, I guess there's a benefit to that. I don't think it's conscious. I think so much of the value judgments that we make are subconscious, that I don't think they're like, well, how will I pit men and women against each other today? No, I don't think so.
Okay. I'm noticing we've got only 15 minutes more, so we want to try to speed it up so we can get all the questioners. So we'll take 2 questions at a time before the panel response.
I know that there are attempts to tackle the men's issues side of the coin in many parts of the world. And my question is whether anyone who's been sort of keeping an ear to the ground in terms of this general subject has noticed a pattern in the types of issues that are chosen to be addressed first or prioritized, and the way that the issues are addressed and the possible effectiveness of it. For example, I know that Australia has something to do with sheds, sort of shed idea, and I'm specifically looking for any patterns, large-scale, broad patterns that may have been noticed in between similar countries like Canada and the US.
Oh, similar
Okay.
countries.
So let's take a second question as well. And then we'll answer them both. Because we take a lot of time per answer.
All right.
Okay, very quickly. So I've learned, Donna, is that correct? Yeah.
Deborah.
Deborah. Okay, I've heard what you were saying. I have to go on the side of Janice here, because from what I'm seeing is that the work that will bring up the change will come from those same entities that are making those decisions now. And I can't see an evolution that will be either there or fast enough. My question is, in that case, given that structure of power, where the power is, where particularly in government and in these policies that are being put, how do you react to this comment that I just made? Excuse me.
Go ahead.
Start with that. So how do I react to the idea that change can't happen fast enough, basically, I think is what you said.
I'm sorry, basically what I'm saying, change, well, will it happen is the first question, because those who are making the decisions right now are those who are caught in the narrative that we've been hearing for the last 30 years. And they are at the top, and they are making, from my perspective anyway, they're making a lot of the decisions happening right now, including how the courts function with regards to who gets custody, who can take care of babies, et cetera, et cetera. They're still there, they're still, and they don't even seem to want to change at all. They seem to think it's wonderful and perfect. So I'm just wondering what your reaction is to that. Do you think there's change that can come fast enough from that when you have a system that's like that?
Yeah. I think that change is, I'm not sure what fast enough would be, which maybe can, like, that's a big question and maybe comes back to the vision kind of thing. Power is always being challenged and it's always unstable, and people who have power are always defending it because there's always challenges. So there's two ways to challenge power. Well, there's many ways, but two ways are from outside, which is what Janice is choosing to do, and other is to choose to challenge from inside, right? So I'm interested in how feminism is evolving and being part of that evolution from the inside. That's my place. That is works for me, feels comfortable to me, and I also think it's really important that there's always more than one group active in any situation, so that, you know, absolute power corrupts, right? So I appreciate and believe that it's important to have men's movements as well as women's movements.
Does anybody want to speak to the previous question?
I don't really have any insights as far as, I mean, like all of the issues that get addressed by men's movements when they first start up. I mean, like, there have been men's movements since the mythopoetic men's movement and all of masculinism and all of that stuff, right? So the men's movements that were aligned with feminism and maybe broke off. So they've all been discussing things like this. In fact, there was Adam McPhee was on Steve Paikin, the Agenda show called Singing the Gender Blues or something like that. And they actually played some clips from, I think it was 1981 or something like that, of a men's group kind of out in the bush on a retreat.
been on the agenda once, it was a long time ago.
No, but this was like it was a clip from a piece that was filmed in 1981 of men, you know, having a group out in a retreat out in the bush and talking about their issues. And they were all talking about the same issues pretty much as we talk about now. But one thing that I would tell you, and if you're looking at maybe being successful in terms of getting a groundswell of support, I would actually suggest you watch Anil Kumar's video, his speech from
yes.
ICMI. The men's rights movement in India is like hundreds of thousands of men. And they get stuff done, and and they are centered around, primarily around 4 issues. One is dowry abuse protections for women that can put entire families in jail with no due process, including their minor children. Domestic violence abuse laws, law abuse that is the same, and rape law. They changed the rape laws fairly recently and radically, and now it's super easy. Like, there's no due process for men. You go straight to jail and you sit there until it's your day in court, and if you're lucky. And suicide, because suicide tends to be a logical solution for a lot of men caught up in the other 3. And they seem to be the focus issues of the massive, huge men's rights movement in India. They go and they stage huge protests and demonstrations and stuff like that, and it's really cool to see groups of men that large in one place with signs, you know, all demanding the same changes and all of that. So yeah, go watch that.
I'll just very briefly add to that. I'm more familiar with what's been happening in the English-speaking world, but some of the themes I've picked up on is that there does seem to be a real shift, first from men's rights to men's issues, and now more and more to men's health and well-being, which is the language that we use a lot as well. And I've noticed, I think with the advent really of Movember, moving from focusing on prostate cancer to then mental health, and now this year specifically on suicide, that seems to be picking up steam internationally, that kind of focus. And if you don't know, November is Men's Month, Men's Health Month, I think partly because of the work by Movember. And so we also commemorate it by focusing on mental health. So that's something that's, I think, getting more play internationally. In the UK, I've noticed the publications there I know these are mainstream publications, do a pretty good job about talking about domestic abuse and male trauma. That just over the last couple of years, we've noticed some really great editorials that do fair coverage to that, much better than in other parts of the world. And in the US, what's been interesting is because of this Black Lives Matter movement, there's been a focus, and I think this is a positive aspect of it, on racialized men, especially black men. And much of the talk, and I've been pleased to see this, has been about the experiences of not just of black people, but in particular black men coming into contact with the police. So that's something that perhaps there can be some synergies between that movement for racial equality and our gender equality movement. Something else, and this is largely to the work of groups like Leading Women for Shared Parenting, Lawyers for Shared Parenting, on a state-by-state basis in the US, there have actually been some victories recently to push for equal shared parenting, which, as many of you know, there was a legislative effort in Canada which stalled, as have efforts in other countries, but going state by state, because in the US, each state is, states can vary very much in terms of their legislation and things like that. They have had some successes in passing shared parenting legislation. Not sure how many states it's at now, but it's making waves. So yeah, there are some success stories. But I definitely think that we can learn lessons in terms of focusing, I think, more and more on health and wellness, because that's something that affects men, but also affects the whole family and the community.
Go ahead.
Just before you go on to the next question, you mentioned,
Anil Kumar.
Yeah, The ICMI conference was fabulous. Perhaps a lot of the people in here, that's the International Conference on Men's Issues in London, was absolutely fabulous. And powerful speeches, including in the...
I'm sorry, I wanted to make a point very quickly, because we've got people waiting in line who've waited in line.
Yeah. They're online, and they're on the Studio Brûlé, so they're really important if people want to see those latest talks.
Go ahead.
I think my question is probably mostly for Deborah. In some of the efforts that I put forward to advertise for this event, I came across a fairly common response to posters and the talks that I was having with some people. And it was often, well, I believe that men's issues belongs in the feminist movement. I would like to see feminism addressing these issues. And I'm wondering if there's anything particularly threatening about letting men handle men's issues. So Karen spoke a little bit about, you know, how maybe we don't want the same thing. I say we like I'm a man. Maybe men don't want the same support systems in place that women do, and that women have traditionally found helpful and successful. So what is it about letting men handle discussions and, you know, facilitate centers and whatever else? What is it about letting men do that that is particularly threatening to feminists? Or is it? Because it seems to be.
Go ahead, we'll take the two questions. And I think, looking at the time, that'll probably be all. I'm sorry, Dan.
I think it's because I self-identify as a feminist, but someone actually came up to me and asked me to ask Deborah this question. He would like to know how you reconcile the idea of a feminism that fights for equality with the notion of patriarchy.
Feminism fighting for equality versus patriarchy. Okay, so the first question, just to be clear on my own perspective or position, I don't think feminists need to handle men's issues, but I think we need to recognize them, and I think we need to be able to work with organizations that are handling men's issues, right? So, and I'm not sure that there has to be a complete separation. This question came up in the men's sheds too. You know, should women be included or not, or what are the benefits or not? And I think, you know, I've been in groups with abuse survivors where there were both men and women, and that's powerful, and it's also powerful to be in same-sex groups. You know, these things I think can be fluid. They don't have to be, you know, stuck, right? And certainly one of the, I'm thinking specifically one of the interviewees that I talked to in my research is the ED of a women's shelter, and she said, we need services for men, and you know, they can handle them, right? We don't have to handle them, I don't want to handle them. So I think, you know, it comes back to this idea that there's a whole bunch of different views of what could or should happen, you know, as we change. And patriarchy and fighting for equality, you know, it was less than 100 years ago that women were not considered persons under the law and couldn't own property and all that stuff. So those things actually are not very long ago. So when I think of patriarchy, I don't go, I don't have a big picture view of it so much as in 1960s when second wave feminism was starting, it was women want to have more of a role in the public world, in the public life of the community that we didn't have. And I think there have been many unintended consequences of those shifts that have happened. And I also think that what wasn't talked about at that time was the role of men in the family, right? So we wanted to move out into the public, and we talked about how that wasn't available to women. But we didn't talk about how men were not integral in many ways in family life.
I have no fun.
All right.
Or we'll be here all day.
Thank you, everybody.
It is, exactly.
I do have one quick thing to add. If you like these kinds of events, please support this organization. There's a pitch coming now. We're a charitable organization. It took us a couple of years to get that. That was not easy to do, but the benefit is we can now give charitable receipts for your contributions. So please make a donation. We are ramping up to launching the Men's Center campaign in Ottawa. Buy merchandise, buy raffle tickets. This is the last time I'm going to remind you, so don't worry about hearing
Give
this
us
again.
all your money.
And please support this cause by coming out to events and volunteering, and you can talk to me or to David about that. But I want to thank again David and his team for making all of this happen, and to my
All right, so last words. This has been dialogue. I love dialogue. Like, this is the answer to everything. It's dialogue. Talk to each other. This is what we want to make happen, and so help us to do it. Contribute, volunteer if you want to help us set these things up. We do monthly speaker events during the fall and the winter. Any planning and setting up and so on. So if you want to help with that, please contact me and I'll put you onto our mailing list and you can come to our planning meetings. As Justin said, we need money to make these things happen as well, and we can give tax receipts. I am going to assume that everybody who's here would like to know about future events. When you bought your ticket, I think you left your email there. We've got it. If you don't want to be on our email list, let me know. Send me an email or let me know some other way. Otherwise, we'll put you on so that you're told about all of our future events. And anything else you want to say before we let all these people go?
I really need a cigarette.
These last words.
So as far as dialogue, you answered it, but 2 + 2.
Let's talk about it.
All right.
Okay. Thank you very much.